In the solution to our data storage lab exercise, we create a two-activity application. In our main activity, we have the 4 buttons to show our last timestamp, save a timestamp, dump the last timestamp to our local file, and read the last timestamp from our local file. If we jump into our main activity Java file, we see in our callback button click method the callback for when our buttons are clicked. We first log the button click in our database for later viewing in our log activity, which you'll look at in a moment. We see that in the case of our show button being clicked, we grab the value from our shared preferences for the last timestamp. If it exists, we show it in a toast. When the Save Last button is selected, we get the editor for shared preferences and use the date class to generate a long representing the milliseconds of the date and time of the current press and commit it to our shared preferences for the timestamp. When the dump last button is pressed, we open a file output stream to our local file for writing the date value, and then we write the date value to the file. Finally, when the read last button is pressed, we read the last written value from our file in our internal storage and create a toast with its value. Now if we look at our on options item selected, in this method, we listen for callbacks to the settings button. When the settings button is pressed, we open a new activity, which is our log activity. Let's take a look at that now. We have the log activity derived from a list activity to display a list of button click counts. We grab the list from our logdb helper by calling the method getDBRows, and then we create a new array adapter with that list. Now let's take a look at our logdb helper class and how it saves the values of when items are clicked for our database and for later viewing in the log activity. Our logdb helper class extends the SQLite Open helper, and in it we create a table that will store the text of the button pressed along with an integer that represents the number of times each button was clicked. Let's take a look at our increment button count method. After the database is set up, we have a method callback for incrementing each button count. We call this in our onClick callback for our main activity. Each time a button is pressed, we pass the string of the button text to the increment button count. We then call a special SQL query with the button text as the text that we will update. Now if we take a look at the special query we're executing here. In this query, we call an insert or replace into our local table. If the button exists already in our table, we grab the value of that button and then we add 1 to that value. If it does not exist, we insert that button value with 1 for that button text. Now let's take a look at how we read the values from our database. In our method getDBRows, we call a very simple select so that we can pull all of the results from our database and return them as a list of strings. When this list is passed back to our log activity, the log activity will display each row of our database as an item in a list view. Now let's run the application and see how this solution runs to solve the lab exercise. When we press the Show Last button, we see that nothing is shown because we have not yet recorded a timestamp. Now let's press the Save button and record a timestamp, and then we can again press the Show Last button and see that timestamp shown as a toast. Now if we dump the last timestamp and then we press the Read Last, we can read that timestamp from a file. Now let's push the Show Last button a few more times for recording our logs. Now as we pre-programmed, we can click the settings from our menu and open our log file. In the log file, we see a listing of all the different buttons and how many times we've clicked each button, which was recorded to our database. Thank you for joining us in this solution to the lab exercise for the Data Storage Lab.